Hello and welcome to I Know Dino. Keep up with the latest dinosaur discoveries and science with us. I'm Garrett.
And I'm Sabrina.
And today in our 507th episode, we have 3 new troodontids.
Yes, all from Asia. We also talk about some new kids' dinosaur books because it's the end of summer, so seems like a good time for some end of summer reading.
Hopefully it's not too late.
Yeah.
And we have Dinosaur of the Day Tianyuraptor, which is a small Dromaeosaurid from China. We've also got our 6th installment of our Dino-It-All challenge.
And a fun fact, which is that different theropods evolved different air sac systems, and those systems are what made their bones lighter.
But before we get into all of that, as always, we'd like to thank some of our patrons. And this week we have a new patron to thank, and that is Steve T-Rex. Thank you very much for joining. And then rounding out our shout-outs, we've got Stygiacosaurus, Tomosaurus, Brosus Girl, It's Devon Baby, Anne, James Pasco, Reed, Dennis, and Mary Sorolophus.
Yes, thank you so much, Dino-It-Alls. We really appreciate you.
Yes, and since we're in the midst of our Dino-It-All challenge, if you join on our Patreon, you can answer the bonus question with an extra chance to win. We had some weird news that just came out. If you subscribe to other people on Patreon, you may have heard this there too. But Apple is now going to take a cut if you subscribe in the iOS app. So if you'd like to be extra nice and you're going to subscribe, if you could do it through a browser.
Yes, you can still use the Patreon app through iOS, but if you sign up another way, that would be very much appreciated.
Yes.
And you can do that at patreon.com/iknowdino. Thank you.
Jumping into the news, kick it off with our troodontids. Up first is the, quote, first troodontid from the Upper Cretaceous Baruungoyot Formation of Mongolia, and that was written by Sungjin Lee and others and published in the Journal of Vertebrate Paleontology, also known as JVP. If the Baruungoyot Formation sounds familiar to you, you have a great memory, or you're a big fan of Mongolian paleontology, or both. The Baruungoyot Formation is a little bit less well known than 2 of the other formations that sort of sit above and below it, the Nemegt and Jadokta formations. It's late Cretaceous, about 70 to 72 million years ago, and there was an Alvarosaurid named there less than a year ago. As an Alvarosaurid, it is a tiny, weird dinosaur with claws sticking out of its chest, and the name of that one was Jaculinicus.
Oh yeah, that was a cute one.
Yes, also really intense by its description because it's named after Jaculus, a tiny dragon from Greek mythology, and Jaculus was sometimes called the javelin snake, which I found just delightful. Pliny the Elder said, quote, "The Jaculus darts from the branches of trees, and it is not only to our feet that the serpent is formidable, for these fly through the air even, just as though they were hurled from an engine." And I think there were depictions of it basically like flying through people. It's just really interesting to combine a javelin and a snake into sort of a dragon-like creature. And then they named a dinosaur after it. I think it's one of the best etymologies of a recent dinosaur. There's also the Dromaeosaurid, aka raptor Shridevi.
Oh, that's a fearsome one.
And that was also from the Baruungoyot Formation. Yeah, we described it as Velociraptor-like because it was presumably right about the same size as Velociraptor. It had a femur that was essentially the same size as Velociraptor, but it had a slightly larger sickle claw. Its claw was about 91 millimeters or 3.6 inches along the outer curved edge, compared to just 65 millimeters or 2.5 inches for Velociraptor. So it is noticeably larger. And that's without the keratin sheath, of course, on either of those. Shridevi also has a fantastic etymology. Shri is the genus and Devi is the species, but since they sort of go together, because the combination of those are Sanskrit for a female protector deity in Tibetan Mongolian Buddhism, and Shridevi, quote, rides a horse or donkey across an ocean of blood. Her accoutrements include a saddle of a flayed human skin,
Oof.
the book of the law, and the dice of fortune, end quote.
Flayed human skin.
Yeah. It's just very ferocious sounding for something that's fairly small at the size of a velociraptor, although it did have some pretty impressive claws on it. So this new dinosaur has a lot to live up to with those recent dinosaurs named from the same formation. The new troodontid is named Harenadraco prima, and Harenadraco comes from the Latin words harena, which means sand, and draco, which means dragon. And then prima is because, quote, this species name prima means first in Latin, referring to the taxon being the first troodontid from the Baruungoyot Formation, end quote. So it's a pretty good dinosaur name. Unfortunately, as pointed out on the dinosaur mailing list, they messed up on the genus and species agreement. So the genus name ends with Draco, which is masculine. So the species name should have also been masculine. In this case, it should have been primus rather than prima. But if you ignore that species name snafu, the genus name Harenadraco is pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
Helpfully, also on the dinosaur mailing list, someone pointed out that harena for sand is the root word for arena, which makes the pronunciation very easy to figure out because just arena with an H at the beginning. And a bonus etymology fact that they shared was that arenas in ancient Rome had floors covered in sand.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And that's probably where the name arena comes from, is because it's a sand area, I guess. The commonly cited reason for why they were covered in sand is that maybe it was for soaking up blood during various violent spectacles in arenas. I found that referenced in tons of places. I'm still a little bit skeptical because I know that gladiator combat ending in bloodshed was not that common of a thing that happened in arenas. So,
But it's got a reputation.
yeah, I think it might have also something to do with that they had a lot of animals in there, and having a sand might have made things easier to clean up and, not just blood. But I can't help but think of Harenadraco, the sand dragon, as a stage name for some ferocious troodontid battling in an arena. I think if I was going to do a paleo art of Harenadraco, it would be in like the Colosseum.
Ready for a big fight.
Yeah, maybe that wouldn't qualify as paleo art. Maybe that would be more of a cartoon, but I don't know.
Regular art?
Yeah. Harenadraco may not have been the best gladiator, though, because it is described as, quote, small and lightly built like other troodontids.
But troodontids, I feel like they could be wily.
Yes. And they did still have those sickle claws because troodontids are a subset of raptor-like dinosaurs. And in general, troodontids are pretty small and lightly built, but their skeletal drawing puts this one at just about 1 meter or about 3 feet long. That is from a pretty incomplete skeleton, so there's a little bit of error bars on there. But if you have the proportions of the bones that they have compared to other troodontids, that's about the size you would get. And that would make Harenadraco about the same size as Compsognathus, which sort of, if you're envisioning it being this ferocious gladiator type animal in an arena, and then you shrink it down to the size of a chicken, it's not so ferocious anymore.
Well, it depends what it's fighting.
I guess that's true. If it's fighting like a pack of mice, then I guess it would be ferocious.
Or chickens.
Yeah, that's true. The authors say it had an extremely slender tarsometatarsus, which is the fused foot and ankle bone that you find in some bird-like dinosaurs. And that detail, quote, implies high cursoriality that could be an adaptation of Harenadraco to its environment, where potential prey animals like mammals and predators such as Dromaeosaurs were likely to be agile, end quote.
So it was a fast runner.
Yes. And really what they're saying there is that both the mammals it hunted and the raptors that hunted it were very fast. So Harenadraco had to be fast too if it wanted to eat and not get eaten.
That's its secret weapon in the arena.
Its speed,
Mm-hmm.
just like a chicken. In this case, that speed led to thinner and more fragile bones that are presumably less likely to fossilize. And so the authors are saying maybe that's why this is the first troodontid material that we found in that formation, because if they're all similar to Harenadraco and they're more fragile, slender bones, it could be a preservation bias. Because some people were wondering, why don't you find troodontids in this formation when we have them in the stratigraphically close Namek and Jadokta formations that are basically on either side of them? But generally, if there's a family of dinosaurs before and after a formation, it's probably a matter of time until you find it in that formation that's in between. In terms of what they have from this dinosaur, you could probably assume that they have some foot bones because I keep talking about tarsometatarsus and how quick it was and all that kind of stuff, which is usually what you find out from feet bones and leg bones. And basically, that's all that they have. They have a fairly decent left leg, a couple of hip fragments, and that's about it. It does include some articulated toe bones, though, although not the full sickle claw. And there is some paleo art of Harenadraco, which really accentuates that foot as it's jumping over a log. It's one of the most check out the foot of this dinosaur pictures that I've seen.
If it's the main thing you know.
Yeah. I like how they highlighted it in the paleo art. You can check it out. It's open access, I'm pretty sure. There's always a link to the stories we cover in our show notes. So if you want to see Harenadraco and how they interpreted its foot, you can see it there. Obviously, the rest of the body is much more speculative since they didn't really find those bones.
And we'll talk about the other two new troodontids in just a moment, but first, a quick break for our sponsors. As promised, there are two other new troodontids to talk about, starting with the new one, Hypnovenator matsubaraetoheorum. It was found in a sleeping position, which is unusual because other troodontids found in sleeping positions, like May or Sinornithoides, were thought to be in a burrow or protecting themselves from a volcanic eruption, and that was not the case here. Although there are two allosaurids that have been found in a similar sleeping style that were found in alluvial deposits, so there are rivers around. With Hypnovenator, the left arm was folded at an angle at the elbow and wrist, and both ankles are folded. It was buried in muddy sandstone of fluvial deposits, so water, and with fragments of plants. And it helps show that small maniraptorans found in a sleeping posture were common in both environments, with volcanic events as well as fluvial systems, areas dominated by rivers and streams. So this helps show that the sleeping posture was common within troodontids.
Not just in burrows.
Yes, and not just because of volcanic events.
They didn't just nap, or the volcanoes didn't just lull them to sleep.
More like they weren't just protecting themselves.
Oh, I see.
So this is one of the oldest, most basal troodontines. Troodontids, they're, like you were saying earlier, Gary, they're small, they were gracile. This one, Hypnovenator, was closely related to Gobi Venator mongoliensis. Gobi Venator is a troodontid found in the Gobi Desert in Mongolia, and it lived in the early Cretaceous, and it was small and also basal. Hypnovenator is the 12th dinosaur named from mainland Japan. It was found in the Hyogo Prefecture, and the fossils were found back in 2010. It's a partial skeleton, including an arm and a knee. It also includes 2 tailbones, 2 ribs, several gastralia, most of the left arm, parts of the hands, parts of the legs and feet. It was found during construction of a public park, and then a year later they found a heel. So they were still finding parts.
Those are weird parts when you say like an arm, a knee, and then you get a heel,
Yeah.
gastralia, ribs.
But this dinosaur had some unique details on the hands and the feet and the femur, the thigh bone. And it had these mosaic features in the feet for both grasping and running. So it may help show this transition toward later troodontines being better runners. Troodontids had similar feet to ostriches, even though ostriches have only 2 toes or foot bones, and troodontids have 4. But troodontids only use 2 of them to support their weight.
Oh, yeah, I guess they had 4 toes if you include the little one sticking off the back. And then they had the sickle claw. So, yeah, they're down to 2, kind of like ostriches. That's interesting. I never thought of that before.
Yeah, and this could be convergent evolution due to being runners. There are non-running dromaeosaurs with only 2 weight-bearing foot bones or toe bones, digits, but their foot bones are still different. In Hypnovenator, it's the oldest troodontine with an asymmetrical arctometatarsus. That's kind of the middle upper part of the foot that seems to disappear behind the other bones.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of pinched in between.
Yeah, and it's also linked to troodontines running fast, which means that this feature's been around 35 million years longer than previously thought.
Oh, because you said it's from the early Cretaceous. I missed that.
Yes. So we're learning a lot from this one troodontid. It lived in a subhumid to semi-arid climate with a lot of rivers and streams. The genus name Hypnovenator means sleep hunter, and it refers to the fossil being found in a sleeping position.
For some reason, with Hypnovenator, I was thinking of hypnosis, which I guess is related to sleeping. But I don't know. I didn't think of the fact that it was in a sleeping position until you pointed it. It should have been obvious, but I totally missed it.
It was a sleeper. And then the species name is in honor of Kaoru Matsubara and Takaharu Ohei, who found the holotype. So they kind of put the 2 names together.
That it might be the biggest, most confusing looking species name I've seen in a year or 2. Putting 2 full last names together into a single species name.
Let's just leave it at there were some interesting comments in our Discord about it.
Yeah. I think in general you should choose 1 person to name a dinosaur after, not 2. It's a little bit much. Or maybe shorten the names a little bit.
Yeah, there have been other species names that combine multiple people's names.
Just not quite as long of a name, at least that I can think of.
Off the top of my head, no, but I'm much better with genus names than species names.
Yeah. I think that species name is something like in the range of 8 to 10 syllables. I don't even want to say it again because it's so long.
I do think it's always cool when someone gets a species named after them because they found the dinosaur.
Yeah, it is nice to give credit for either finding or preparing or some of the people other than just on the more academic side of things in the naming of the dinosaurs.
Right, or the, how did you put it, place name ensis?
Place name source, place name ensis. Yeah, that's true.
So, cool find. And then next up is another troodontid. This one, speaking of species name, this is a new species. The genus was already named a while back, Urbacodon.
Or Urbacodon, I think, is in one way we heard it.
Urbacodon, yes, because it's named after an acronym.
Oh, yeah. So really the pronunciation could be anything.
Well, it's a new species of Urbacodon. It's Urbacodon norelli, just named after one person.
Nice. I appreciate it.
Oh, and just real quick, Hypnovenator was named by Katsuhiro Kubota and others and was published in Scientific Reports in an open access paper. So this new troodontid species, Urbacodon norelli, and that species name, if that sounds familiar, it's named after paleontologist Mark Norell for his, quote, leadership and contributions to expeditions and fossil discoveries in the Gobi Desert since the early 1990s. This was published by Shuo Wang and others in Cladistics. And Urbacodon norelli lived in the late Cretaceous in what's now Inner Mongolia, China, found in the Harenadraco Formation. It's named based on an incomplete right lower jaw and 12 replacement teeth. There's differences in the grooves of the teeth and being large, as well as some features in the lower jaw that make it unique. Troodontids started by being named based on teeth, so this kind of keeps with the tradition in a way.
A terrible tradition, but okay.
Yeah, the name Troodon means wounding teeth.
Yeah.
The first species of Urbacodon was Urbacodon idamurensis. It was named back in 2007. We covered it as a dinosaur of the day in episode 481. And that species was found in what's now Uzbekistan. It was also named based on a lower jaw, the left one, and teeth, and it had unserrated teeth. And then more fossils were described later that includes a partial brain case and parts of the feet and vertebrae, though those fossils might belong to a different species. We'll see. For both species of Urbacodon, The lower jaw is lightly built and strap-like, and it curves inward at the tip. For this new species, the fossils were found in the late 1990s, and it lived in an area with a lot of large herbivorous dinosaurs. It helps show the diversity of paravian theropods in the area, though, because not many have been found in that formation. The fragmentary right lower jaw that they found is about 2.5 inches or 6.5 centimeters long, and there are 11 in situ preserved replacement teeth and then one tooth that fell out of the jaw after being collected. So that's how they get 12 teeth. And they did micro CT scans of the fossils and studied the tooth replacement pattern, and they found an alternating tooth replacement pattern, which helps avoid gaps because it wasn't losing teeth at the same time.
I see.
It seems to have had 2 teeth at once. There was the one functional tooth and then the one replacement, kind of waiting in the wings. So yeah, those are our 3 troodontids, as promised.
Nice.
They don't get quite the coverage as raptors or dromaeosaurs, but they're still pretty cool.
Well, they are kind of dromaeosaurs, just like a specific dromaeosaur, depending on where you draw the line.
They're closely related. They're deinonychosaurs.
Okay, yeah. I think I might be thinking of other phylogenies that put them inside a little bit more. But yeah, deinonychosaurs is the correct terminology. Thank you.
You're welcome. Episode 500 helped me with that one. And now we're going to do something a little bit different. Just talk about, like we mentioned at the beginning of the show, some really cool dinosaur children's books that we have been lucky enough to get review copies of. So thank you, publishers and authors. We always like reading books.
Yeah, Sabrina especially can read books very quickly.
Yeah.
I can't.
So yeah, I wanted to mention a few this episode because, like I said, it's the end of summer. Seems like the perfect time to finish strong with some dino books. Although we do know some kids who've already got back to school. But that's another story.
Yeah. Even without school, summer can be a good time to read books.
Yeah. I'll start with The Iguanodon's Horn by Sean Rubin. If his name sounds familiar, we interviewed him a long time ago about another dinosaur book that he did, Bolivar, which was also really well done. So with The Iguanodon's Horn, it's, as you can imagine, all about kind of the state of Iguanodon over the years and how we understood it, and explains how science is a process. There are a lot of quick facts accompanied by illustrations. The illustrations are a lot of fun. There's some funny captions and speech bubbles. There's a lot of humor in it. And the concepts are broken down in this fun, easy to understand way. So it's a nice style, especially if you liked Bolivar.
And I assume the title is in reference to the fact that when they found the thumb claw for Iguanodon, at first they thought it was a horn on its nose.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, so it talks about the history of how they found the how the animal fossilized, and then how the fossils were found by humans, and then how things have changed over the decades in terms of what we thought Iguanodon looked like.
Nice.
Yeah, so it's well done. And then in the end, there's more notes with details and myths around dinosaurs and background on who's in the spreads and their stories, and just more details in general about the people mentioned in the story.
It was factually pretty good, past your muster.
Yes, I've done a lot of research on Iguanodon, and
No red flags.
no, this was great.
Okay, that's good. Because that's a lot of times with kids' books, you get some interesting claims and facts and figures that don't necessarily line up with what we usually see.
Well, having talked to Sean Rubin before, we know he does his research.
It's good.
And the next book I wanted to mention is called Maya, A Dinosaur Grows Up. This was by Jack Horner and James Gorman. So you know it's factual because Jack Horner wrote it.
I don't know if that's a joke or not.
Oh, it wasn't meant to be.
Okay.
I just think you got a paleontologist writing a book.
Yeah. He sometimes throws out an outlandish claim or two, though, so.
Probably not in a children's book.
Oh, yeah. Hopefully not.
This is actually an update to a book that they published back in 1987, and they included some new information in it. For example, there was a study by Holly Woodward and others that found Maiasaur had to grow up fast because it was just too dangerous to be small. And, now we know Troodon may have had feathers, so there's some updates in there.
Oh, cool. So the Maya a dinosaur grows up, I didn't realize was Maya Sora that it's referring to.
Oh, yes.
That makes sense because we have the babies and we got the mama.
Yeah, it's the story of the good mother lizard, and it's told through the eyes of a Maiasaura. And the illustrations are by Doug Henderson, and it tells kind of the story of, once the Maiasaura hatches out of the egg and as it grows up and all these kind of challenges it has to live through.
Nice.
It's really dud, and everything comes full circle for Maya, the Maiasaura. She herself becomes a good mother dinosaur. As a newish parent, I feel bad for the baby dinos that didn't make it because
That is sad.
it was a hard life back then for the baby dinos. But I also know that they fed other types of baby dinos, so that's something.
That is something. So they presented it in the sort of sea turtle approach. They lay a whole bunch of eggs and hope some of them make it kind of mentality.
Not quite, because they're good parents, right? It's the good mother lizard. They're taking care of their babies and they're doing their best to make sure nothing bad happens, but they can't prevent everything.
Yeah. And they had, I think, reasonably large clutch sizes. So if you lose a few, it's not the end of the world.
Yes. But like I said, I mentioned Troodon and its feathers. Troodon makes an appearance.
I see.
So you got to watch out. But there were a lot of good details in a way for kids to understand and some fun speculations. So I enjoyed it.
So there are some speculations.
When you're telling a story through a dinosaur's point of view, it's hard not to speculate.
That's true. And it has to be a little bit fictionalized in terms of, probably their thought process.
Yes.
Otherwise, it would just be like food, mate.
Right.
Food.
There's a little more to it.
Water,
than
sleep.
That. Yeah. It's a little more of a story than that, I would say.
Okay.
And the last book I want to mention is A Dinosaur for Washington by Kelly Milner Halls. And this one's about Sushisaurus rex, because that's the dinosaur for Washington State.
Mm-hmm.
I know you're not a huge fan, but actually you might appreciate it more if you read this book.
Okay, maybe I need to read it so I can stop being such a grump about it.
Yeah, it's a great story. It's easy to follow. I learned a lot about all the people involved. There were a lot of people involved in Sushisaurus rex. They talk about what we know, how we know it, what's left to learn, and information about how things become a state dinosaur, as well as fossil hunting and the process of fossilization, and then theories about how Sushisaurus rex came about, because, as we know, there's not really dinosaurs found in Washington because when dinosaurs lived, it was mostly underwater.
Yeah, and I think it's also very green, and I think the rock that's up there that's exposed isn't quite the right age, if I remember right. But every time you say Sushisaurus rex, I wince a little bit because that's not the name of an actual dinosaur. It's the nickname of a very small fragment of a bone that they gave this binomial name to make it sound like it's a real dinosaur, but it's not.
Well, it is a real state dinosaur.
Yeah, that's true. And tomatoes are fruit.
Read the book. I think you'll appreciate it.
Okay.
So yeah, if you have a chance to get a copy of those or
read them at a library.
Yeah, exactly. Then definitely recommend. And we will get to our dinosaur of the day in just a moment. But first, we're going to take another quick break for our sponsors. And now onto our dinosaur of the day, Tianyuraptor, which was a request from Paleo Mike 716 via our Patreon and Discord. So thanks.
Sounds familiar. Maybe
because we recently had that episode about dromaeosaurs, and it's a dromaeosaurid dinosaur.
Mm-hmm. So it's even more familiar to you.
It lived in the early Cretaceous in what is now Liaoning, China, found in the Yixian Formation. It lived about 122 million years ago. And it looked somewhat like Velociraptor, but it had much shorter arms. It was probably covered in feathers, though no feathers have been found with Tianyuraptor. But raptors in general, we think, were feathered.
Yeah. It was quite a while before Velociraptor, though, being 122 million years ago.
Mm-hmm. It had a long tail and long legs. The tail was long at about 38 inches or 96 centimeters. And of course, being a raptor, it had those sickle claws on the second toes. It also had a proportionally large skull, which was longer than the femur or thigh bone. And it had stout teeth. It was medium-sized, estimated to be about 2 meters long, or about 6.5 feet.
So it's almost half tail.
Yeah, it happens a lot with dinosaurs. It was similar to other raptors found in Liaoning, but more basal. It's been classified as a basal microraptorine, though it is much larger than other known microraptorines, and it's not for certain that it is a microraptorine because it has some features of microraptorines, but it also has some features of unalagians.
So maybe it was a mini raptorine instead of a microraptorine if it was bigger.
Is mini bigger than micro?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or just a regular raptorine, which I guess just makes it a dromaeosaur.
I mean, that's quite a bit bigger if you think of microraptorines like Microraptor.
Yes. Yeah, 2 meters is getting up there.
The type specimen of Tianyuraptor had features that were seen in dinosaurs that lived in Gondwana in the southern hemisphere, and not Laurasia, which is the northern hemisphere.
Even though it is from Laurasia.
Mm-hmm. Intrigue. It was the sixth dromaeosaur described from the Jehol group, after 2 species of Sinornithosaurus, 2 species of Microraptor, and Gracilraptor. It had long lower legs like other microraptorines. That's different from other dromaeosaurids that have relatively short lower legs. It also had a small wishbone or furcula and short arms. Its arms were only 53% the length of the legs, which is different from other raptors. Most of them have long arms that are over 70% the length of the legs. But Tianyuraptor probably couldn't fly or glide based on having the short arms and the small wishbone, and also have wide shoulder bones. It probably used its arms in different ways from other raptors, but not for flying or catching prey. Maybe it had its feathers for display. There were several unique features, like the length of the middle tail vertebrae were more than twice as long as the back vertebrae. And Tianyuraptor helps show more diversity with dromaeosaurids. Microraptor, for example, had long arms. There's another dromaeosaur that's large with proportionally short arms found in Liaoning. That's Genuanlong, though Genuanlong and Tianyuraptor are not closely related. The type species for Tianyuraptor is Tianyuraptor ostromi. It was named in 2009 by Xiaoting Zheng and others. The genus name refers to the Shandong Tianyu Museum of Nature, where the fossils are stored, and the genus name means Tianyu's robber. The species name Ostromi is in honor of John Ostrom for his contributions to the study of raptors.
Good old John Ostrom.
Yeah, and raptors. The holotype's nearly complete and fully articulated. It's only missing the end of the tail. It's probably a subadult based on having parts of the skeleton unfused. No soft tissues were preserved, like no feathers, even though many dinosaurs found from that area do have soft tissues preserved. But 25 tail bones are preserved and they're articulated, and only 3 at most are thought to be missing. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
Tianyuraptor lived in a wet, humid climate that also had dry seasons and cold winters. Other dinosaurs that lived around the same time and place include the Ankylosaur Liaoningosaurus. There were also hadrosaurs, the compsognathid, of course, Sinosauropteryx, dromaeosaurs like Sinornithosaurus, troodontids like Jianianhualong, and lots of birds. And other animals that lived around the same time and place include pterosaurs, reptiles, lizards, mammals, and fish.
Very cool. Not quite a troodontid to go with the theme, but close. Being a dromaeosaur.
Yeah. Both of them being Deinonychosaurs, as you know now.
I sure do. Thanks. And now we're going to get into our Dino-It-All challenge, our 6 puzzle. 6 out of 8, so there's only 2 to go after this. But first we need to reveal the answers and the fastest people to get those answers from last week. So the question for Puzzle 5 in episode 506 was which dinosaur was running/flocking around the Denver Zoo, and the answer was Ornithomimus. The fastest listener to get that answer right was Ryan the biochemist.
Yay, well done.
Yes. Another win for Ryan the biochemist. The next most common guess was Alvarezsaurus.
Oh, that's a good guess.
It is. They were also feathery and pretty bird-like, which were some of the descriptors we had in there for the mystery dinosaur. But they were tiny and more the size of a roadrunner than an ostrich. So that's how you could tell the difference. We also talked about sort of leaning over a fence to drink on the other side, and I don't think Alvarezsaurus could have pulled that off. Maybe it could sneak through a fence, depending on how fine the fence mesh is. And then the key to it not being Deinonychus or Megaraptor, which were the other options, is that they don't have beaks. And we described the mystery dinosaurs having a beak. So, yeah, basically the ostrich-like clues were meant to be the giveaway. And we thought about making it Struthiomimus, the ostrich mimic, which would have been more fitting for the place where it was found. But the second question was kind of tricky, so we went with a more well-known dinosaur for the first question, even it out a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of the second question, the patron question was, which 2 animatronic dinosaurs should the zookeepers use to scare the Ornithomimus flock into the right direction, into that empty enclosure which was available? And Ellie got one of them right, Albertosaurus, the
Nice.
first answer in. But Ryan the biochemist again was the first to figure out the pair of Albertosaurus with Tyrannosaurus, because it had a multiple choice, double answer.
Oh, yes.
Pick 2.
Got a little bit tricky there.
Yep.
So well done again.
Yes. A double victory, kind of like the Olympians that win 2 events in a row. So the reason that we said Albertosaurus and Tyrannosaurus are the 2 to choose were several. One of them is that they're much larger than the other 2 options of Guanlong and Deinonychus, so presumably they would be more intimidating to Ornithomimus. Additionally, being larger, they could block off a pathway easier in the zoo to redirect. If you had a small dinosaur there, it might just run around it if it notices that it's not a major threat. But the biggest reason, as usual, is becoming a trend with these answers, is that they lived around the same time. So Ornithomimus likely would have recognized this size and shape of animal as a threat.
Mm-hmm.
Ornithomimus did live for a pretty long estimated time range, basically the entire last 10 million years of the Cretaceous. There are at least 2 different species of Ornithomimus and probably more in such a long time range, but there wasn't enough information in the puzzle to figure out which species of Ornithomimus it was. So we sort of spanned it and said Albertosaurus and Tyrannosaurus. They didn't live at the exact same time, but they were both within the Ornithomimus time range. And since Albertosaurus and Tyrannosaurus are both large tyrannosaurs, and most ornithomimids would probably recognize a large tyrannosaur as a threat, they might be a little bit interchangeable because they look vaguely similar. They look fairly similar. I also think that a prehistoric animal would be easily tricked by an animatronic animal because they would have never seen anything like that before.
It's just like when people saw the first moving pictures.
Yeah, I was thinking that too. Like the train movie, and people are like, a train's going to hit us.
Yes.
Or, I mean, it works with animals too. Like you put up a little, I think you, as a kid, made a robotic owl or something to scare away pigeons.
Yes, the scare pigeon, we called it.
Yeah.
It didn't work. Well, it worked once, and then the pigeons caught on.
Exactly. But it did work once.
Mm-hmm.
So we only needed it to work once. So I think it's feasible that it could work once. For the other dinosaur options, there was Guanlong, which is a tyrannosauroid, but it was much smaller and it didn't live in North America or in the Cretaceous, so that is not as good of a choice. And then there's Deinonychus, which was in North America, but it was at least 40 million years before Gallimimus, and again is much smaller. So honestly, Ornithomimus might have been scared of any of these things because they had sharp teeth. Also with those animatronics, weird movements might have scared them. But the larger contemporary with them, Tyrannosaurs, probably would have been a better place to start.
And if you only have one chance to do it, you want to make sure it works.
Yeah, or more likely to work, I guess. And for our puzzle this week, we're in Uncompahgre National Forest in Colorado. It's in western Colorado, if you're not familiar. It's afternoon in the forest, and the sky has taken on an ominous green hue that matches the trees. A couple has been hiking all day and are looking forward to a well-deserved rest. And not a moment too soon, They can hear thunder in the distance, and they think their tent is in a relatively safe area to ride out the storm. The couple passes a break in the trees where they can see Uncompahgre Peak. A bolt of lightning strikes one tree near the base of the mountain. They start counting as soon as they see the flash and only make it to 5 before they hear the crash of thunder. A moment after the thunderclap, they hear another loud crashing sound. At first, they think it's a tree falling, but it sounds different and unlike anything they've heard before. When they turn, they see the source, a shockingly large animal, easily twice as long as an elephant and much, much taller, with a very long tail. It rears up on its back 2 legs and hits one of the towering fir trees. It's a dinosaur and has an imposing presence. This animal is so tall it doesn't even register the 2 hikers looking up at it. And the hikers can barely see its head, which sits maybe 40 feet on top of a long neck. They can make out the silhouette of the head, though. It's tall with a sort of bump on top. So our first question is, which dinosaur is it? Is it Shantungosaurus, Brachiosaurus, Corythosaurus, or Giganotosaurus? And if you want to answer that question, you can go to bit.ly/DinoChallenge507, since this is the 507th episode. And for our second scene, our bonus for our patrons, the hikers had counted 5 seconds between the flash of lightning and when they heard the thunder. They remember that the speed of sound is much slower than the speed of light. Each 5 seconds, sound travels 1 mile, while light travels a mile in a tiny fraction of a second. That means that since they counted just 5 seconds between the lightning flash and hearing the thunder, the lightning is 1 mile away. The dinosaur has calmed down after the lightning strike. It doesn't seem to realize what a threat lightning can be. It has noticed the hikers with their neon reflective green backpacks and is intrigued. It is still a few hundred feet away, but it has turned towards them and is walking slowly towards them to investigate their packs. It occasionally knocks down a small tree in its way, as if stepping through a shrub. Lightning can easily strike across the span of a mile in moments, so the hikers need to get to the safest place as soon as possible. They decide they will use the dinosaur's interest in their packs to lead it to safety too. Normally, they would head indoors or inside a vehicle, the safest place to be during thunderstorms, but there are no vehicles or buildings in sight, let alone anything that the dinosaur could fit inside. There are 4 locations close by. Which should they choose to stay safe from the lightning? On top of a hill? Near an especially tall tree? In a group of small trees near larger trees? Or in a clearing far from any trees? And as a hint, if you need help on this one, our fun fact in episode 447 is all about lightning safety. I know we're a little bit late. The 3rd week of June is Lightning Safety Awareness Week, but better late than never? I think so.
You probably think about lightning a lot more often than 1 week in June.
Yes. Every time I hear statistics where they say, you're more likely to get hit by lightning than X, I always think, you're pretty likely to get hit by lightning. So, like, dozens of Americans get hit by lightning in a typical year. It's something that happens. So, yes, if you hear lightning, go inside. In a building that has plumbing and electrical and/or electrical.
Even if you see lightning?
Yes, if you hear thunder or see lightning. And if you want to answer that Patreon question, you can get to it on patreon.com/iknowdino, or you can also get to it through the bit.ly link. We have a back link to the Patreon question there as well. And if you want all the rules and restrictions for the Dino It All Challenge, you can get them at bit.ly/DinoChallenge24.
And as a reminder, in addition to bragging rights, especially if you're the first one to answer the questions, because we'll give you a shout out on the show, there are a number of prizes that you can win in our Dynamite prize package, including a large Spinosaurus tooth, courtesy of Mini Museum, a real Eocene fossilized leaf, courtesy of Ancient Odysseys, a signed Why Dinosaurs poster, courtesy of Why Dinosaurs, Captive's color change slime eggs, courtesy of Toy Monster, and a Dino et al. Parasaurolophus patch, in case you missed out earlier this year.
I think it's a pretty good collection of prizes.
Mm-hmm. We've got our sticker in the picture too, so we'll probably end up throwing in some of those.
Yep. And again, you don't have to get the answer right in order to enter the prize, but if you get it right and you're the fastest, then we will shout you out on the show if you want. And you also don't have to be a paid patron to answer the Patreon question. You can join for free now and answer it that way.
All right, and moving on to our fun fact of this episode, which is that different theropods evolved different air sac systems. And again, air sac systems are what made their bones lighter.
And they're breathing oh so fancy.
Yes. This was published by Tito Orleano and others, including Aline Gilardi. And I just want to say thank you, Tito, for sending us this paper. They've been studying air sac systems of sauropods and pterosaurs too, and we've covered them in previous episodes, so it makes sense that they're building on with air sac systems and theropods. This was published in the Journal of Anatomy. Now, theropods are, this is pretty impressive when you think about it, quote, the longest living and the only surviving clade of dinosaurs with an evolutionary history spanning over 200 million years, end quote. That's because they include birds.
Mm-hmm.
Some key aspects of theropods are they have these agile, lightweight bodies. They're capable of explosive pursuits. And of course, in some cases, they can fly.
Many cases now, less so in the Mesozoic.
Yes. So the team looked at how pneumatic bone tissues, an invasive air sac system, evolved in theropods. And they analyzed CT scans of Majungasaurus and Rahonavis to see the different patterns of air sacs.
Because Majungasaurus obviously could not fly.
Right.
Whereas Rahonavis probably could.
Rahonavis was bird-like. It was a paravian theropod. It lived in the late Cretaceous in what's now Madagascar, and then Majungasaurus was a ceratosaurian theropod that also lived in the late Cretaceous in what's now Madagascar, so they lived alongside each other. And Majungasaurus, of course, is known, well, for a few things, but one of them is that dome-like horn on the top of its skull.
The thing I know it for is cannibalism.
That is probably the bigger thing.
A big meat-eating cannibal.
Yes.
Well, not that big, actually, but big-ish. A lot bigger than us.
Yes. Big for where it lived.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the Majungasaurus specimen was moderately complete. It's unclear how old it was. It was likely a subadult based on having some unfused bones. And the Rahonavis skeleton that they looked at was a partial skeleton, a mature one. It's the holotype. Overall, both of these skeletons are well preserved.
It's good when you're trying to piece together air sac systems because
Yes.
it's complicated.
You want to see as much detail as possible.
And it involves a lot of bones.
Yes. They found more air sacs in Rahonavis compared to Majungasaurus. So, increased pneumatic complexity in Rahonavis, if you want to get technical.
It's a fancy way to say more air sacs.
Yes. And Rahonavis being a paravian, paravians had an advantage when it came to flying and gliding. It seems that there were distinct patterns in Maniraptorans. Maniraptorans also include Rahonavis. Just like all these dinosaurs, they are nested in multiple groups.
Yes, so many groups, especially when you start talking about birds and bird ancestors. You can list like 60 groups sometimes that they're in.
Yes. So Rahonavis shows that paravians evolved complete pneumatization or air sacs in their skeletons early on in their evolution, which would have helped with the evolution of flight, although not all paravians flew.
And that's because they have the coolest way of breathing, where when they breathe in, it fills not only their lungs, but their air sacs. And when they breathe out, it empties their air sacs into their lungs, and then the lungs exit out through the mouth, essentially. So they're constantly getting fresh air into their lungs, either by breathing in or from the air sacs. And that's how they can get a more consistent oxygen exchange and potentially do things like fly longer.
Yeah. I know sometimes you get a little jealous.
So cool. Feathers are also really cool. And they get lots of teeth.
Yeah. Oh, right. More than the two sets we have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the thing I'm most jealous of by far.
Anyway, back to the study. They also found some details in Majungasaurus that were similar to Allosaurus.
Oh, really? That's much earlier
Mm-hmm.
and far away.
So pretty cool. And I'm sure we'll see some more cool papers coming out of this team. Thanks again for sharing. That wraps up this episode of I Know Dino. Stay tuned. Next week, we'll be talking about a new Tyrannosaur, and of course, we'll have the next Dino It All challenge. And if you want all the rules and restrictions and details for the Dino It All challenge, you can head over to bit.ly/dinochallenge24. Thanks again, and until next time.